Hello and welcome back to the Projector Stories Podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Sarah, a 1-3 emotional projector.
I'm Lora. I'm a 5-1 splenic projector.
And in this podcast, we basically just riff on what is going on with us within our deconditioning journey. I shared with Lora this week that I feel like this is not something that a lot of people talk about. There's a lot of conversations that happen publicly around correctness, strategy, and authority, theoretical things, what Ra said, and that kind of thing, but I haven't come across too many deconditioning conversations, just generally speaking. So in a sense, we're just trying to, I guess I'm just trying to make deconditioning real and not just something that, you're doing, because we're in it, we're in the midst of it. It isn't pretty. We can be really bitter at times, if not all the times. And between that and our right minds and the 1156 channel of storytelling, we got a lot going on here. So, Lora, how are you? Has there been anything that has been going on in your head or in your life that you'd like to touch on this week?
Indeed. So I'm just organizing my knitting right now. So my mind's like trying to detangle a bunch of balls of yarn, but I'm going to put that aside for this second. So yes, this might be a little TMI. And this also feels strategic because I've been saying this to myself in preparation for saying it here. I don't know why. It's just what we do. We really can't help it. It's very frustrating. So in my head, it feels scripted, but it won't come out that way with my right mind. Anywho, it feels TMI, but as a 5-1 or as a line 1, is anything really ever too much information? I feel like all line 1s need all the information. So nothing's ever TMI for me if you ever feel like getting weird stuff off your chest. But there's that. And then also I'm a Sagittarius, and I feel like we have no shame sometimes when it comes to conversing and the things that come out of our mouths. So maybe TMI, maybe not, but I'm in my luteal phase. Going back to that conversation we had several weeks ago about hormones, I'm in my luteal phase, and Sarah knows this because I'm anticipating my menstruation. And what we talked about last time, how the not self mind can get really antsy-pantsy when it comes to anticipating menstruation. And we're just so much more in our heads with the hormones that are in our bodies. But that's not what I wanted to share. I feel like there's a strong parallel between me in my state right now of anticipating menstruation and then our deconditioning process, in which the body is just going to body and the not self mind is going to try to control the entire process of what's happening. So here's the information to lay it out. 2 weeks ago, I told Sarah, I had a very short fertile period, ovulatory period, and there's indicators. Google it if you want to see what it means to be fertile or ovulating. And I told her I felt gypped of that potential energy, because when we're ovulating, we have higher amounts of estrogen in our body, we're energetic, we usually feel good, and we feel more embodied. That period for me was rather short, potentially so short that I did not indeed ovulate, and that I had a glitch type of cycle. And for everyone who is unaware of the patterns of our menstrual cycles, your period, your menstruation is not late, hardly ever late. What's late is ovulation. The time in between ovulation and menstruation is really, really, really fixed. It's a physiological, mechanical process, just like cellular deconditioning that takes 7 years. You can't change it. You can't speed it up. It's a process. You have to go through it. And so you thinking your period is late, it's not that your period is late. Your period's right on time. What was late already happened, which was ovulation. Or maybe you didn't ovulate, potentially me right now, and so there is no actual period to be anticipating. But anyways, I told Sarah, I wake up every morning, and I haven't for the past few days with cramps, and yet there's no cycle. There's no menstruation. And I'm just trying to just let my body be a body. But no, my mind is overanalyzing it, thinking why isn't it here? what is happening? Where's the invitation? Where's like the opportunities that it needs? Where's the chance for the splenic response to respond to something? And it's very heady. I'm very much in my head instead of just in my body. And that's like deconditioning. Like your body is going to be a body. Your body's going to do what your body does. And this is something Sarah and I talked about this past week regarding things happening virtually versus being in aura in person with people. Like in person, your body is more likely to be natural. Oh, I was interrupted, which, I put my phone on do not disturb, but it still disturbs me. Like calls come through. I don't know how to do it so you don't receive any calls. I don't know how to do that, but I'll figure that out later. Anyways, um, the body's gonna do, I think that's where I was. The body's gonna do what the body's gonna do. And yet we get so caught up in over analyzing the deconditioning process, but it just takes time. And so I thought, even though it may be TMI for some of y'all, I thought it was a great analogy or parallel to look at how we get in our minds about our cycles and our bodies, and we expect things of our bodies, but you can't force your body to behave differently when it has its fixed mechanical process. And that process is what it is. And you can't speed it up. You can't slow it down. You can support it. You can support with foods, nutrients, medicines, herbal medicines, artificial medicines, whatever. You can support your body, but you can't change the deep mechanical process that it is physically experiencing. So that's my little anecdote for today.
I love that. That brought up like 5 different things in my head. The first one, just to say, because Hosier dropped a new EP today, and like people, the internet gets really excited over things like this. And so it led me down this rabbit hole of looking at his chart, and like lo and behold, he's a 36-6, but with an open emotional center. And it's so interesting to me because so much of his and this is gonna come full circle, so just give me a moment, but so much of his like fame has come in from these like deep sexual and intense lyrics, like Take Me to Church. I'm sure everyone knows that song. It was super good, but like also deep, deep sexual, 36ing hard. And, it's funny because as Lora was talking, she's a 5'1", we know this. And she has her design sun within a open sacral center. And it's just so funny that I'm going to use the word that we used in our title last week, harping on essentially the cycle that happens within basically what's sacral energy. Um, because I'm like feeling the connection between how in touch you can be with something when your design sun is there, even if it's in an undefined center. And so I just wanted to point out that it feels very correct and accurate for you, to be heretical about the menstrual phase and the menstrual cycle and everything that has to do with it. So just as a little aside about your design and the conversation starter. This is obviously, we don't really cut any. Basically, we're cutting straight to the chase, people. So I hope that if we have any male listeners, you're cool with hearing about this kind of thing, because it's so very important and relevant to all of womankind. So thank you, Lora, for talking about that. And it's interesting too, because I was going to also say we have an eclipse coming up on the 25th, I believe, happening across the Aries Libra axis. And even though this is mainly a human design podcast and we don't really address a lot of astrological stuff that isn't related to human design, I still have like a bee in my bonnet about the rising sign and the, kind of how it fits into human design in a way. And And so Lora has this happening across her first and seventh house axis. And I just think how destabilizing eclipses across that axis can be for the physicality as well. And, you know, I could even look into where it's happening on the design side. The third thing that I want to say is that I was listening to Martin Grassinger, which will bring me into another point. So I'll let you talk before I get there. But I was listening to Martin Grassinger, who's like very health focused, human design. And he said something that was actually comforting to me. He said that a virus is an opportunity for consciousness, because basically it's a new type of consciousness that's entering your body. And so it has when you get sick, it's the capacity to expand your awareness. And that feels a lot better than just being like, I'm sick, you know, and not to say that you're sick or anything, but just to say that like when we have these glitches, right, in the system, and we have these very experiential moments when we're thinking that it's going to be a logical process with specific patterns unfolding, it's like there's an opportunity for awareness to expand. So that was all just taken from your opening remarks. Do you want to touch on anything that I just said?
Yeah, regarding the rising sign piece, it's interesting because someone posted in the Human Design and Astrology group yesterday. Well, for me, it was yesterday. For you, listener, I don't know when it was, but about rising signs. And for the people who are still astrology advocates, can't think of another way of putting it, but people who still believe and follow astrology, like what their take on rising signs are. So maybe you should respond to that person, Sarah. But yeah, it's the first eclipse is basically on my ascendant. It's 2 degrees away because my ascendant is at 7 degrees Aries, and my body is not happy in like any means. I just picked like the menstrual piece as like the focus, but there is a lot of other stuff that's going on with my body right now. And yeah, like the body's gonna body, and you can support it and as much as you can, again, within your own PHS and your own intuitive listening to what your body needs. But it has a lot of unusual stuff going on right now, stuff that's like very left field, haven't experienced it before. And I'm just like, oh, look, this whole new issue that I've never experienced before that I now have to navigate. It's like not stuff that's old and recurring that's coming up. Some is, but at the same time, it's giving me ample opportunity to practice herbalism on myself, which I've not been taking my tinctures, which I'm feeling cognition, which is cyclical. So with cyclical cognition, you think you would keep up to your patterns and your habits and do them regularly, but I have kind of thrown everything out the window in terms of my tinctures. And now that it's spring and things are green again and plants are alive, I'm much more inclined to do the whole herbalism thing and harvest and forage and do all that. So it's nice, but at the same time, like my body is not happy right now, and it's interesting just experiencing physical forms. But we're all human, we all got one, so it's what we're here for. And along that note too, I think it was Johannes who posted in the Practical Human Design group, he's one of the admins, but he posted a quote from Ra, which was something along the lines of like, everyone's trying to find oneness, but what I teach you is duality. Like there is no point to try to find oneness because there is no one, there is two within us. And one of the two has to surrender, and it's not going to be the body, it's going to be the personality that's going to have to surrender to the design. It's the design that's in charge. And it was a nice refresher because it's so easy for the mind to think that it's in charge when it's not. It is not. But yeah, so that's
So true.
closing remarks on that front.
Yeah. Well, no, and I love that quote too. I saw it as well. And I'm definitely I'm not a part of the Human Design and Astrology group, although I should be.
Oh,
So
you're not?
I'll be sticking my little projector aura into that after we get off of the call. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of bringing me, since we're talking about bodies, into the topic that I've been thinking about, because Lora bless her, sent me a podcast or a YouTube video about, from Leann Wolff, I think that's her name,
Yes.
that talking about the gut and the body and the relationship between PHS and deconditioning and things of this nature. And it was a really interesting conversation because here's the thing. We understand that we need to follow strategy and authority, of course. We understand logically that our minds are not in charge and that the bodies are in charge. But, I'm an abstract person. And so what I understand more than most people is that you can have the best logical pattern that makes sense, that literally works over and over again. But when the rubber hits the road and we're not living in a vacuum, there's so many things that can go fucking haywire. Excuse my French. Actually, don't excuse it. This is who I am. And the reason that I say that, Laura, I don't know if you listened to it yet, but maybe this conversation. Okay. So good. Great. Wonderful. Then we'll be able to talk about this. Something that really just hit me was one, there was this discussion about how the gut, when it's essentially in what I would call dysbiosis, it can physically make you attract or want things that are technically not good for you, physically good for you. So this kind of puts a wrench in the concept of generators responding, right? Because if they're responding because their gut is got candida or something like that, they're going to want a lot of carbs or sugar and the like. And that's not necessarily them, right? It's this colony that's within them, within their gut lining, that is creating this dysbiosis that's, creating other problems. And this is where there's just a lot of places where human design is such a baby. It's so young that there's so many places that are left to explore. And there's a lot of people who are sticking hard and fast to just the basics of human design because enough people just have not deconditioned yet. And so it makes sense to stick to those. But then when you think about the vastness of this type of thing and how many areas are left to explore, it really, it makes you realize, there's so many things that we have to think about in terms of the way that the rubber hits the road with this, as opposed to just thinking about it within the pattern, the logical pattern and the logical framework. So, I say all of that because something that she offers in the video, one of them offers, the woman that I think her name's Issa that's getting interviewed, is this basically a decondition your gut diet that she used. And it made me think, one, how does she know that her body did not just heal because of time? How do you know it's the diet and not something else? And not time. And then it also made me realize when you were talking about being a herbalist and getting back into herbalism, that for me, I've had really intense periods where I've been on really intense diets and I have gut issues, right? So this is why it's all relevant. I've talked about it before on the podcast. And I don't have the will nor the desire, nor is it correct for me, I think, emotionally, to start going on some kind of intense diet like that. And so it reminded me that okay, how much of this gut stuff doesn't just get healed because of the deconditioning process in and of itself? How much of it is a feedback loop where if you stay in dysbiosis within your gut, you're not able to decondition as fast? There's all of these questions that talk brought up because it was so, she was basically giving her own anecdotes and her own stories of the way that her own life has kind of unfolded. And she said a lot of really interesting things. But, it still comes back to strategy and authority. And I know that isn't really, I'm not asking any questions or making any points there, but I just want to open that up with that. And Lora, please fill in any blanks that I know I left.
No blanks. But I had my own questions or judgments or concerns while listening to that talk. One of which was, it sounds homogenizing, because Issa was saying, like, people need bone broth, they need to heal their gut because they all have, not that she's like made such harsh definitive comments, but it had that quality that she was making harsh definitive judgments, saying that a lot of people have gut issues, which maybe they do, maybe they don't, but that in order to fix them, that they need to take bone broth. And I have an issue with that from the human design perspective, in that, like, if you have part of the 1949 channel, you shouldn't consume meat alone in your own aura, because it'll interfere with your dream plane. And I've had that experience. I have 19, and if I consume red meat in my own aura, it causes nightmares. And I used to suffer from nightmares a lot. And they would be recurring, and it would be awful. And I slept in my parents' bed. Here's conditioning, like, sleep in your own aura. No, I couldn't sleep because my nightmares were so awful that I had to sleep with my parents for a very long time to ease the nightmares. I needed extra conditioning and not to deal with my own, even though I don't know how much I ate meat as a child in my own aura to have that be the cause of my nightmares. Anyways, as I've deconditioned and as I've stopped eating meat in my own aura for the most part, nightmares have for the most part stopped, except this week, obviously, because it's eclipse week. Nightmares are all of a sudden back. I told Sarah, like, I have nightmares that my teeth hurt, like my jaw physically hurts in my sleep, and then I wake up and there's no pain, and then I go to sleep and the pain is there. I'm just like, why am I dreaming about pain? It's very counterproductive to sleeping well and being rested as a projector. Anyways, if you have 1949, then eating meat in your own aura is maybe not the best option. And if you have a PHS that is like Sarah's or Issa's, low sound, calm touch, in which the only way you can actually eat correctly through your PHS is by being alone, then how are you supposed to eat that meat correctly or those meat products correctly? It's only if you have 3740 along with 1949 or part of 1949, with 40 being part of it, of being able to be alone. That's the only piece of the puzzle in which it seems like it's better to be alone. And then the third piece, like she's saying, everyone eat meat, but it's the 952 that's there to digest protein, that is supposed to digest protein, which I have the 9, and then 2644 is more of poultry. But she's like telling people to consume stuff that she doesn't have in her chart. I can't remember. I think she may have had 19. I knew she had 37. I don't remember if she had 1949. I think she did, at least part of it. And she didn't have 9 or 52. And she's like telling everyone to do this thing. And I was thinking, I wonder if she's had a solar return or a life cycle, whether it's like the Saturn return or Chiron or Uranus opposition, that has some of these energies, these transits, these gates that are activating these things in her that are allowing her to heal using these techniques that seem counterproductive or counterintuitive to what is innate within her own chart. And I wonder how that affects our healing journeys, whether we are more inclined to be able to heal certain things based on transits, like gate 60 being defined by Pluto. Like, maybe the whole world is on a sugar binge and it's correct for us because we have Pluto in 60. I don't know. Those are the thoughts that came up in my own head, of just like, it feels homogenizing, and again, what is there?
Yeah, and I mean, like, look, I'm not trying to criticize anyone, because there's plenty of criticism that can be.
Sorry, was that rather judgmental? That's my gate 18.
No, it's okay. It's no, this is the point I'm trying to make, is like, this is a conversation that needs to be opened up, right? Like, it needs to be opened up, because there's multiple moments within that talk that I found fascinating, and I will be repeating here in just a moment. And there's also places where I was like, I'm just not really sure about this, like what Lora was saying. How much do transits play into the way that we heal? How much is just because we're sick being actually correct for us, as opposed to being not self? One of the things that I read, I don't know if Ra said it, somebody said it, but it's like, the bottom line is that we go through experiences as ourselves, and sometimes that means being sick, right? The I guess the horror for a third line is when we go through experiences not as ourselves, don't learn anything, and we're hurting ourselves or are sick in the process, right? And it's not necessarily for me to say what is what yet, because I haven't gotten to the point in my deconditioning where I can delineate everything in that way. But, I was someone I was sick in my 20s, gut stuff, skin stuff, all kinds of stuff. And I've tried everything, everything under the sun. And it was really traumatizing because it got me to a point where I was so mentally afraid of food, because of all of these stories that I had around it. And like, my open spleen, like, thinks that like would hop on something for a period of time thinking, oh, this is going to work. And then it would stop working. And so there's all of this stuff around these intense diets. And what I've realized is the longer you spend deconditioning, what happens is you just get closer and closer and closer to yourself. And you get more in touch with the things that are correct for you. Even if in the first year you may have no idea how to feed yourself, you're eating all of the foods that are, maybe wrong for your PHS or in the wrong environment or based on the candida that's in your gut. It's like everything is everything and everything is reflective of everything else. So it gets really interesting to start thinking about illness within these frames. But something that I wanted to touch on that I found to be really incredibly interesting in a positive way that she said was that as you heal your gut, because the biggest thing she was talking about is leaky gut or having a very porous gut lining because of, all of the different things that you did intentionally or unintentionally that just were not good for your stomach and your digestive tract. If this permeability of your gut leads to a permeability of your energy. And I thought that was something that I think that's very true. I think that if we don't have, like, our body isn't, our stomach, and this is someone who's an emotional person who's had gut problems and is still working through them. One of the things that I noticed that I think is so fascinating is I have this gut stuff, but it's so also related to my emotional wave and my nervousness and my anxiety, my fear, all of those things. It's like it's all tied up. All of these stories are all tied up within my gut issues. Like, it's not even that I talk about them together. It's like literally when I'm afraid of something, I can feel it in my stomach, and if somebody else, does something to me, it's like I can feel it in my stomach. And there's this almost like very porous nature, I feel, of my aura, where I'm so sensitive to what other people say and do according to me. In reference to me, because I don't have the kind of thick gut skin, thick auric skin to realize, okay, this person is separate from me. And it's not that I don't realize logically that they are, but it's like my physicality is still very weak in that way. And I think as I continue to decondition, I'll become less sensitive to it. And she said, just to give an example, that she used to not be able to watch like violent films, and it's because there was like this extreme porousness, like this extreme empathy, like a inability to separate herself from what was happening on the television. And I feel that, I feel like a inability to separate myself from what other people do or say sometimes. Or what I'm watching, if it's violent, if it's emotionally intense, things like that. not by choice. Like, this is literally just the way that I'm experiencing life right now as I'm deconditioning and as I'm healing. And so there is something, I think, to be said about the holographic nature of things, as above, so below, as within, so without. If my gut is not well, then maybe my capacity to contain myself within my own boundaries is still under construction, if you will. So those were two things that I just wanted to point out that I thought was like very fascinating, despite the fact that I don't love the idea of like thinking that you need to eat specific things in order to heal your gut. Lora?
Yeah. I have things to respond in this moment. My dogs, however, are extremely hungry. I'm debating whether we should pause this and start re-recording in a second, or if you guys want to just hear them scream like maniacs, and then I'll have to cut that clip out. What do you think, Sarah?
We can pause it. Pause it. Go ahead.
Okay,
We'll hop back
be
on.
right back after this break, which you won't hear a commercial because we don't have sponsors, but we'll be right back.
Not yet.
And we're back. Sorry. They both came to my room and were harassing me, and it was very difficult to keep them calm. But yeah, so I had questions about that information. I haven't started listening to Martin Grassinger to have a foundation to understand it, but I wonder where is the intestines in the body graph? The mouth is 37 and the stomach is 40, right? Like those two gates in that channel have that connection, the mouth and the stomach. But I wonder where is the actual intestine where we absorb nutrients and then have this issue with leaky gut.
Part of it is 30-41.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Because in this video, they talked about how sometimes it helps to have a more carbohydrate dense diet, like fiber, lots of things to like have solid movement in the body to process the emotional wave. That like having more bulk inside of you, more density and heaviness inside of you allows you to be able to better process and like have groundedness and density and matter inside you to process the emotional wave. I thought that was interesting. But in terms of the permeability, I feel like I've had the opposite experience. Not that I've been on a gut healing journey or anything to be able to relate directly to Isa, but as I've been more and more deconditioning and in my experiment, I have become much more sensitive to violence and to not being able to listen to things, to being much more selective, which like I don't have selective caves or selective PHS or what have you, but my body has become much more selective with the things that it can listen to or be exposed to or watch. I don't watch TV anymore really at all, and I haven't in a year. I don't know how long it's been. I forgot how long it's been since I watched TV, but like I'm consuming romance books like nobody's business. And I can read violence, but I can't watch it. And I just think that's weird. But yeah, like my body's become much more sensitive to that. So I think that's interesting. Like the whole thick skin. And like comparing that to what you said about viruses, because it's sort of similar. Like what they were saying in this conversation is that your gut lining is not human. Your gut is human, but the lining, like all the life that lines it, is not human. And so if it's open, it allows everything that is you're taking in outside of you to penetrate into you and condition you from the inside out. But like you need this alien living inside of you, inside of your gut lining, to protect you from that stuff coming in and conditioning you internally. And then what you said about the virus, like the virus is also alien. It's a living entity that enters you and uses you as a host for it to survive. And it can condition you too. And just like it has matter, therefore it has neutrinos, therefore it is a carrier of consciousness. So it's really interesting to think about everything in that way. and how we consume things that are dead for the most part. Like, you kill a plant before you eat it. You kill an animal before you eat it. Some cultures eat animals alive, and that is them. Like, not all animals, but I'm thinking octopus in particular. That's the only animal I've really, and oysters. I guess oysters are also alive when people eat them. Most creatures are dead when we put them in our bodies, and most plants are also dead because you have to kill it, pull it out of the ground in order to be able to eat it. But when it comes to viruses and pathogens and bacteria, those things are alive. And so they're interacting with you, within you. And it's really interesting to think about how you're not just sick, you're having a dialogue, an internal dialogue with consciousness. And it's more than just being sick. But yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
there's other stuff you said, and I can't remember because dogs and concentration, but
That's okay. No, that's exactly, it's fascinating. You know, it really is fascinating. And just to speak to what you said, like, there's all kinds of, I think that I agree with the sensitivity towards things like increasing as you decondition. And I absolutely am not a proponent for watching violent television shows. It was more like a kind of extreme anecdote to explain the kind of thing, because I know that for individual circuitry, there's all kinds of acoustic stuff going on there. And, you know, depending on specifics of your design, you can be more sensitive or not to sound, to sight, to all of the things. So, not to say that you become thick-skinned in a way that allows you to desensitize yourself to things, but it's almost like if you've ever seen these, and it's funny, it was perfect timing for Johannes to post that quote about it not being a dual, or it being a duality, and that one aspect of the self has to surrender. But yeah, it's very, for me, the kind of point, and it's going to be hard for me to explain it as always, everything in my brain has to come through the 1156 in order to get out. But just the idea that there are people, and you all know them if you've ever been in like the spiritual community of people, that are so disconnected from themselves. They're either disassociated, they're like disconnected from their physicality, disconnected from their body. They have this almost like extreme empathy to the point that it's not healthy for them. Like, because of this, I think what I would call like almost like a auric permeability of not knowing where you end and where someone else begins. And this has been, you know, I think this is one of the biggest either lessons or parts of who it is that I am, learning this, because I was raised by someone who is not only codependent and mentally ill, but had no sense of real boundaries. And so I grew up not understanding where my own boundaries were, you know, from myself to the other. I mean, throw into that having the 6 as my design, or I'm sorry, my personality earth. And it's like, you have to understand, like, my emotional center has been really wounded, I'd like to say. I don't know if that's really the right term, but by this unboundaried experience of reality, because everything becomes my fault. I control everything, right? There's all of these mental frameworks that I was living inside that actually hurt me and created more codependence within my relationships and more unhealthy, traumatic relational experiences because of it. And so when she said that, you know, it's not to be taken and generalized, because nothing really is here in human design. But from my own experience, I can see how so much of my deconditioning has been about delineating what is enmeshed within me, right? Delineating what is me versus what is my openness, what is me versus what is the other, right? The fact that I'm not the 22, like we talked about a couple episodes ago or last episode. The fact that I have a self, a vibration that in its essential nature is clean. But when I am identifying with all of these things that aren't me, whether it be within my relationships, which is typically as a projector how it shows up, is taking blame for relational dynamics, is having no sense of boundaries around, what I as a person can control for the other person. And this happens because there's a lot of blame and shame that gets thrown around when you're dealing with codependent and unboundaried dynamics of like, this is your fault because, but it's like, it has nothing to do with you. People and the 3041 and emotional people in general love to blame things on other people, like love to blame their wave on other people. So you can imagine my mom's got the 3041. She's an emotional person. She's deeply not self. She's super, like I said, unboundaried. And so there's this like just extreme quality of having so much that was not mine thrown on top of me. And it literally, what I would like to say, because everything is everything, it like eroded the lining of my gut. And now that I'm deconditioning, I'm like finally coming to terms with it and starting to understand like what is mine, what is my frequency, what is my responsibility in this life, what is important for me, what is not, when am I thinking about things that don't matter, all of the open center talk. And I don't think this is how everybody experiences deconditioning. I think, it depends on what your openness is and depends on what your authority is and depends on what your incarnation cross is. And, the list goes on and on and on. But I just wanted to say like, that is where I really resonated with it and started to understand that, like, we know this is a process. Like Laura said in the beginning, like the body is deconditioning and the mind is going to continue to do what the mind does the entire time. No matter what we try to do, we can't force the river or we can't force the process to go faster than it's going to go. And I think the same is true for healing and for my gut specifically, as far as I'm concerned. But okay, I just rambled for a long time, Laura.
It was a good ramble. Tangent, sort of, not a tangent, side, sort of, branch to the tree. The permeability thing. I was thinking about Issa being a manifester. The manifester has like a bulldozer type of aura. It is strong and durable, and things should bounce off of it. Manifestors inherently, quote unquote, homogenizing statement here, but they should have thick skin. So it makes me think of how perhaps it was correct for Issa to go through that process of being incorrect as herself, being permeable, and then realizing that she needs to develop a thicker skin and having that accomplished through whatever means possible in her deconditioning journey. Whereas generators, they're both enveloping and closed. Their aura will open and close depending on what is correct or incorrect for them to take in. So they have a movement to their aura that either takes things in or becomes closed off to things. So they can have that quality of thick skin or not. Reflectors also have Teflon auras where like they can only take so much before things have to bounce off of them. But projectors, we're special in that we get to take everything on because we got to go into the other person's G center and be like, ooh, look at this comfy, cozy home. Let's see what's in this body for us to pretend is our own. And so we aren't meant to have thick skins because that's not what we're here for. We're not here to be open and closed or to bulldoze or to do that. We're here to be conditioned by others. And so I was thinking about that. And also, like, someone with all 9 centers, they're 9 centers, yeah, all 9 centers defined. Sometimes I still think they're 7, and I get confused in my head which number is correct. With all 9 centers defined, they're going to be more closed off. They have more rigidity to how their centers operate, so they have less of that permeability. Whereas someone with only 2 centers defined have 7 centers open, and so they're going to have a lot more of that permeability, to use that word. And so I was thinking about you talking about the solar plexus, because we can make the blanket statement that An open or undefined solar plexus is naturally empathic because it's going to take on the emotions of others and amplify them. Whereas a defined solar plexus should, quote unquote, should blanket statement, ill gross, but should be closed off and be less permeable to things because you have your own set emotional wave going on within you, your own emotional mechanics. Um, and so I was thinking about that, but like those are a lot of shoulds and generalizations and homogenized statements that I don't know if there's room for those here or if there's accuracy to them or standing and rooted foundation qualities to them. But those are just the things that popped up in my head as you were speaking.
Yeah.
Because like the blanket statement, like the logical thing is to assume that a defined solar plexus shouldn't be emotionally permeable. It should have that thick skin quality to it, right?
Yeah, well, I think just one thing to say is that, and I don't know which Raw lecture that he talked about this, I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically that the interesting thing about the emotional center is that it can take in the emotions of other people and it can put out its own wave.
Ooh.
So it can do both. It can take both. So, and I think that's also as we move towards 2027 and this mutation that's happening, it's part of the reason that we're going to have this like extrasensory experience based on the solar plexus, because it has this, it is a two-way street. It isn't just one way. Um, which I think some of the other centers are more like a one-way kind of situation. So, yeah, I mean, everything that you said, though, of course, we don't, just to say, I love saying this because I have a lot of the fear gates going on in my design, and especially in my ajna about not being understood. And like, we are okay with being incorrect. We understand that incorrectness is just part of the process over here. At least my three does, and Lora knows as well. And so we may say things that are overgeneralized. We may say things that are incorrect. We absolutely want you to follow your own strategy and authority, which should go without saying, but I'm just going to say it again. As far as everything that we're talking about is concerned, but this is just our own outer authorities trying to make sense of the world and sometimes not doing it as perfectly eloquently and without any without any errors as we possibly can. So no, what you said I agree with and I understand. It's just the one thing about the solar plexus I wanted to interject in there.
I am curious if you ever remember where that's from. I'd like to, well, I say I'd like to listen to it, but I probably
Oh,
won't because, again, permeability with the gates of deafness, they are impermeable to sound sometimes. And I just have not been able to listen to any raw or like really any human design content much recently. So that's another thing, like
well, my
individual
right
circuitry.
mind.
Go for
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say my right mind has no idea where that came from.
it.
I know that it was Raw, but if I stumble across him saying something along those lines again, I will be sure to shoot it over.
Yeah, kudos to everyone in the groups who like know where things come from. Like you ask them and they'll like send you the audio or the file. You're like, how do you know all this? Because I do not.
I love
I
that.
don't know if they take
Yeah.
notes or if they have like some sort of organizational system, but I most certainly do not. Um, but yeah, the individual circuitry, it has to be closed off and impermeable so that it can have its own internal mutative process. It can't be
Yeah.
open. Whereas tribalism is open to the tribe and the collective is open to the collective. Like there's crossover everywhere, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that, yeah, kudos to everyone who does that. I have this sense, I get the sense that the longer I stay within human design, I'll probably listen to the same thing multiple times. Right now, it's like the wild, wild west. I'm just like absorbing things all higgledy piggledy, like all over the place. Like, I don't even know. I listen to 3-year program and then listen to, I listen to like bits and pieces of this, listening to the Gates thing over here. And Ra doesn't like talk about things in a contained way, so we could be talking about gate 6 and he says something about the solar plexus. And then, when you're actually talking about centers, he says nothing about what I just said. So it's not like there's one place to find everything that Ra ever said about the ESP, but yeah, it can, and experientially it can go both ways, but it's an interesting topic, the whole situation, the whole thing. I mean, it brought up a lot of just curiosity within me, that, yeah, what the conversation between Leann and Issa was about. And so I just want to also shout out to them for having an interesting conversation, whether or not I can, agree with everything it's irrelevant, because people are not going to agree with everything I say, but it still doesn't make it any less interesting, right?
Yeah, so that's on YouTube on Leann's channel if y'all want to listen to it.
What's her name? Her full name, Lord?
Leann Wolff?
Okay, it's Leann Wolff. Okay, I was right.
Pretty sure. That sounds right. I don't know.
I thought there was like another word in there, but maybe not.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I don't have a middle name, so I'm not used to using middle names.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think if you look up Leann Wolff and like gut PHS on Google,
It'll
you
take care of
will,
you.
or yeah, it'll take you there. So, I could probably put it in the show notes, but I don't know. It was a very, again, like I love these types of topics because like I listen to Raw, and what ends up happening is that eventually at some point, he says things about things, but then we need to extrapolate from there. There's a lot of things that need to be extrapolated from what he says, because, he only had so much time and so many, like, and so many places where he's recorded to like try and lay everything out. And he did an amazing job, but like there's all of these little tiny like corners and spaces of human design that I want to dig deeper into, that it's just, again, we're on the bottom floor of this thing. And so it's going to be, probably decades and decades and maybe centuries of time where we're still kind of like ironing everything out. And it also brings me to the just fact that he's said many times that, this information is for children. And so the complexity of the not self and its capacity to stick around is profound. And so there's things that are, that have been created from the not self that may be just as like illnesses, that may be just as complex. And yeah, it deserves its own like corner of study and its own branch of everything, of just like understanding illnesses in relationship to people living, not self lives, and how they spring up and where, and all of that stuff. Because, we hear there's been a saying, and I know that in a living your design class that my aunt took, someone brought up Steve Jobs, and I brought it up on this podcast too, that he was emotional. He was probably living incorrectly, not following his strategy and authority, because he was also a generator. And he got pancreatic cancer, which is part of the emotional system, the pancreas is. But like, I don't think that we can prove that, like how do we come near the truth of what that is, within all of the complexities and within all of the like different nuances of the way that his life unfolded, and what's correct versus what's incorrect. Again, what is correct suffering and, correct viruses to have, etc., versus what's not. So there's just so much. There's so much there.
In terms of old people, not that he was that old, but I think that it's been said somewhere that like as people age and get nearer and nearer to their own demise, that there's this recognition of, oh yeah, that's what is correct for me. Like they get into their own process of understanding how they operate, but it like naturally happens over the span of a lifetime. Like you can't really get there without becoming across the information directly like any faster, if that makes sense. Like I feel like words, my dogs are like barking at things and it's rather distracting, and they're like clicking with their little feetsies on the ground. Something else, just to talk more, but something else that I found really fascinating, that I have found fascinating before from this conversation, is to talk about what's going to happen to the human animal connection come 2027 with 1949 no longer being a channel. Not necessarily in terms of meat consumption, but in terms, like they talked about this in the conversation too, so go listen if you want to towards the end, but I'm concerned about sheep. Hi, I like to knit, and I've told Sarah, I don't know if you ever listened to the audio message I sent you, but I was just like ranting about how wool is phenomenal. Wool is amazing. It's a great fiber. It's sustainable. It decomposes. Like it has so many great qualities to it. It's great in the heat. It's great in the cold. It can retain moisture without feeling damp, whereas like you get cotton wet and it's like gross immediately. Wool, it's like antimicrobial. It's like naturally clean. It doesn't smell. You don't have to wash it. There's so many great things about it. And sustainable, not sustainable, but insustainable fashion, high fashion, fast fashion has decimated the wool industry. And now wool farmers or sheep farmers are having a lot of struggle because they're not able to make a profit because there is not as much of a need for wool anymore. And I'm concerned, like here's my concern for the future, for the sheep and the wool. I feel like we should wear less plastic. We should wear less microplastic for the planet. Like even if we're gonna die, it's not good for us. Like we experience health issues as a consequence of wearing plastics all the time. And then we're eating it because it goes into the water, and then the fish eat it, and then we eat it, and it's not good for us. Wool is good for us. Homogenized statement. Here it is. Wool is good for us. And I'm just concerned, like, what's going to happen when we lose the 1949 channel and we lose that connection with the sheep? Like, are we going to be able to produce wool in the future? I don't know. Will I be dead by then? I don't know. But that's my like major concern. Not the one about like, can we still have dogs as pets? Sure, that's important, but I care about the sheep. So if you play Settlers of Catan, you know, because wool is one of the 5 industries.
Well, I don't play that, but I know that there's probably many people across the world who share your concern, maybe not for the same reason, but it's very fitting, Lora, that you would be most concerned about sheep. Somehow I feel like it makes sense, but is it okay if we shift gears from this topic, or is there anything else? Okay. Well, there's 2 things I wanted to say. The first one that I wanted to say is about what we talked about in class. Like I said, I'm taking a living your design class, which I know basically the basics of what we're learning, but it's just interesting to be in a class of projectors and to be like watching and seeing and the interactions and things like that within the classroom framework and within the course syllabus. We're talking about the centers that have to do with fear, and I also listened to Ra talk about the different centers when it comes to fear. And something that I find interesting, and not even interesting, I guess this is more of like a question, Lora, maybe you can just talk about it a little, even if you don't have the answer. But, the gates that we have that are associated with the awareness centers, those are fear gates. And so in a sense, it is correct for us to have some level of fear from those particular gates. And so, for example, I have the 17th gate in my ajna, which is a gate about opinions. And the fear of that is that, that your opinion's wrong, right? Sharing your opinion is going to not be taken because your opinion is not correct. Or, something like that. And I have that fear all the time. And I guess, bottom line is that, you still have to follow strategy and authority. And so even if you are afraid of something, it doesn't mean that you're not supposed to take action. It's just like a recognition that this is, a part of your mechanics. But I wonder how the the open gates play into that. Like, how do the gates of fear play into it? Like, are we just really not, we don't really access those types of fears unless there's a transit or something like that? Or are we always being, I guess you could say, ambushed with these fears if we have people in our lives that have the gates? How does the open fear gates work? Do you have any idea or thoughts?
Well, I'll just first say that Sarah has a open spleen with no gates. So, but she has a defined ajna and defined solar plexus with those fear gates. So Sarah's spleen doesn't have any undefined hanging gates in there, whereas I have a defined spleen and a defined ajna, undefined solar plexus, but I have gate 37 in my solar plexus. So Sarah, do you remember what the fear of 37 is?
The fear of
Isn't it the fear of
37.
tradition?
Yes. Yeah. It's like that. It's like the fear of tradition and the fear of also not upholding tradition. It like goes because it's a duality. It's like being afraid of it and then also being afraid that it's not going to be there.
Kudos to my right mind for remembering that, because it's been a
I
long
know.
while
I'm
since
like,
I
I
listened
just
to the
learned
fear
that.
gates.
I'm like, I have no idea. I learned it in class and I listened to it from Ra and I couldn't remember. So kudos to your right mind
It's
for
how it
sure.
works. Like you really don't know what's in there, um, especially with the right brain too. So personally, hold on, I'm gonna close my door because family members came home. Personally, I do have a fear of tradition, and I would say that I do identify with that fear, with needing to follow tradition, being subject to the traditions of others, and the confinement that exists within that tribalism, because 37 is tribal. Um, my body, however, will participate in tradition when it's correct for it to do so, when it's invited, which I'm going to use because 37 is part of the spiritual way. Like, let's use church as an example, because it's kind of what it is. Um, Religious traditions, right? Upholding certain tribal rules, which are like you have to go to church. And even if my mind doesn't want to go, sometimes my body will. And I don't know if that's because of the tribal bonds that my body is a part of, that it will just do what it needs to survive within the tribe. But my 37's on the personality side, it's my personality moon. It doesn't like it and it has a lot of issue with it, but the body's still going to do what the body does. Again, probably from that sense of fear of being outed if it goes against tradition, of like, if I don't conform to the tribe and follow this tradition, I'm not going to receive what I need in order to continue surviving. Not that all the fears deal with survival, like the spleen in general deals with survival, but the Ajna doesn't. It's just there for the fun of it, for thinking things out. But another layer of like looking at fear from human design is like everything that has color one. Color one is the color of fear, and everything that has that flavor to it has that root in, fear being the motivator to figure something out or to do something about something. Um, I don't know. To answer your question, like I experienced that fear. Um, I also have the fear of inadequacy with my gate 48. I have the fear of judgment, which is a fear of like parental stuff, which that's a fun one. Just like the judgment of parents and needing to move away from what our parents did for us. Um, that's not it's like a fear of perfectionism. I can't remember the rest of like the names for 18, but the root of it, when you like analyze it, it's about familial upbringing also. Um, what's the fear of,
Authority.
yes,
Yeah.
authority. What's the fear of 11?
It has to do with darkness, about basically like just being stuck in darkness without any like new insights or light. It can be really melancholic, you know, and it's interesting because both of my 11s are in my unconscious, and so I don't identify with them, but I assume that a lot of stuff I have done out of that fear, you know, kind of mechanically.
You don't identify with that fear because it's unconscious?
Well, I don't like with my 43, which is, you know, the 4323 is the Genius to Freak channel. And it's again about like being perceived wrong, not being understood. And then the 17 being the gate of other people not, you know, rejecting your opinions or arguing, you know, with you about your, you know, thoughts and opinion, your logical thoughts and opinions on things. Like I identify with those, but like I can see where those show up even, and they're both conscious. But the 11 is a little bit more amorphous for me. It's, you know, it's about the fear. It's in a sense similar to the 47, I believe, because that too has to do with like this oppression of like nothing, there being no point. But the one with darkness, it's more like they're never being any ideas, you know, that are like going to turn the light on in a sense. So they're related because they're both abstract, but I don't see that in my consciousness the way that I see the other two. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
that's interesting. I forgot about 47. Thanks for reminding me that I have that one too. Lots of fear gates, and I have 43. Um, I want to say, okay, so my 18 is unconscious, my 48 is conscious, my 43 is conscious, 47 and 11 are unconscious, 37 is conscious. Um, when it comes to fear, 37 creates internal anxiety where it's a physical visceral experience, like like you were saying earlier, when something happens with your solar plexus, you feel it in your stomach. You feel the fear and the anxiety in your stomach when something comes up and interferes with your wave. Similar, like with that fear, again, maybe because it's in the solar plexus with 37, like I will feel it in my body and it will give
Mm-hmm.
me anxiety, and it gives me that physical sense of fear of like something is gonna happen. But when it comes to 47, it's a fear, but it's more of a philosophical fear of just like, I have no idea what's going to happen to the world. Like, we are doomed. We have no hope. Like, we are a shit show of a planet. What's the point of it all? Like, oh, we're so oppressed. It's not that I'll feel it physically in my body, but I do identify it with it mentally. And again, maybe that's just because it's a mental gate. Um, I feel the fear of inadequacy for sure. I feel like everyone doesn't feel inadequate in our world. People with defined egos. But for most of us, whether you have 48 or not, like the fear of inadequacy is for sure real and pertinent and everywhere. And that is it felt in my body? I don't know. See, I feel like that one's also more of a mental energy. It's not necessarily visceral in my body, but it's a personality side gate. So like there's for me no hard and fast lines like I can see how this one shows up because it's like this. They each
Yeah.
have their own flavor, regardless if they're in a divine center or a hanging gate or a channel or what have you.
Yeah. Well, and I think just to piggyback on what you just said, something else to point out, like I did not learn that it was unconscious fear if you have it in an unconscious gate. I'm just curious as far as I'm concerned because I don't experience that 11th fear in such a obvious way. But it could also be because that's a channel for me, you know, so the way that the fear shows up when it's, you know, we have this quantum field may be different than if it was a hanging gate. I don't know, you know, these are all just, you know, musings and considerations about the nature of what is, again, what's correct, how to delineate what's correct versus correct fear versus what is not. You know, it's like for me, I have I have 6, 36, and 30 all defined in my solar plexus, in a defined solar plexus. And I also have, the solar plexus connected to my root, which is adrenalized emotional wave, basically. And so I have adrenalized emotional fear, nervousness that can literally take me out. Like I can like be incapacitated by it. I can be so nervous, so afraid that I can just not be able to like actually communicate or function, depending on, the person in question that's creating the fear within me, or the situation that's creating the fear with me. So yeah, I mean, it just brings up these questions because I've been having them a lot lately, of like going back into my childhood and repeating certain things and trying to see, okay, where was I being conditioned versus where was I just having unpleasant experiences that were ultimately correct for me, right? So that's something that I've been asking myself a lot, as we decondition and get more sensitive and get more specific within our own understanding of our true frequency. It's like, well, for the 36-6, like, crisis is part of it, and so having crisis doesn't mean that it's incorrect, but I have allowed my fear to take me out of the game in a sense, and I'm not sure that that's correct. So that's kind of where all of these thoughts, and the reason that I brought it up in the first place came from, is just the difference between not self, um, fear, in a sense, that creates stuff that is going on in your mind that takes you away from your strategy and authority, versus just correct fear, and correct unpleasantness in life, generally speaking.
What comes to mind in response to that is thinking about these three centers as authorities. You just said strategy and authority. Like splenic authority is about fear, like the spleen is about fear, or people who have just mental and ajna definition, just the head and the ajna, so they have soundboarding, but like the ajna plays a role in how they're soundboarding and thinking about things to figure out what's correct, or people with emotional authority, um, is, having clarity about the fear over time versus the spleen having the fear in the moment. I don't drive, and not for a lack of trying or not being able to, but it's not like I have mental fear when I'm in a car. I don't. I'm fine being the passenger too. I've never been in a severe car crash. I've witnessed severe car crashes. That's not fun. The things I've witnessed. But so it's not like I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna die, and I'm thinking about it being in a car. Like, I'm fine. My spleen is fine. But when I'm behind the wheel, my body will go into panic mode. And maybe that's the fear of inadequacy. I don't know. Or the fear of not being able to, I don't know what it is, but like my body will react and like my vision will go blurry, and then I can't drive, not because I'm having mental anxiety about what's happening, but because my body is not allowing me to. And so it's happened several times as I've tried to learn to drive. Um, and because of that, like I mean, again, the spleen is very spontaneous. It has like maybe there's a very particular reason in those moments why that happened. And if I tried learning again, I would be fine. I don't know. Um, but because of those past experiences, I'm hesitant to try to learn to drive again because I've witnessed my body going haywire behind the wheel for no logical reason. Like mentally, I was like a-okay, and then all of a sudden, like I break out in sweats, and my body just freaks out. I'm just like, what is wrong with you? Like, why can't you just drive the vehicle? But it doesn't always happen. But I don't know. Maybe it's time to learn to
No.
drive again. But I wonder about that in terms of, the spleen being there to protect the body based on fear. Like if there is something that is dangerous to the survival of the form, the spleen is going to say, hey, this is dangerous. You should be afraid of this thing because you're going to die. And that's how the authority works. But then, yeah, the solar plexus, it's more of just overcoming that anxiety, perhaps if it's anxiety, overcoming the lows of the wave, and waiting it out and seeing what is there at the end of the day, or at the end of the sentence, the end of the wave, the cycle. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting to think about.
Well, and that was like such a perfect example of what I was trying to say of like, is that response body's having, is that like is it ultimately correct for you not to drive? And I don't know,
The thing is, like,
but
I wait until I'm invited. It's like I have had someone invite me to teach me to drive, but a generator, but they haven't um done a lot of the initiating. Sorry, my throat's getting so this is another weird thing with like listening to your body. Sometimes with a defined throat. And I used to do this a lot more when I was like doing readings for people. Like when my throat started to close up, I'd be like, I'm done. Like I'm not supposed to talk anymore because my throat is saying like we've had enough. My throat will get all like itchy and tight. So it's doing that right now, which is interesting. So we're done. But just to finish this thought, because my sacral center is like, no, we're not done. We have to keep going. I have been invited to drive by a generator that my body's usually really comfortable with. He's taught me other things in life, and it's not someone I have physical anxiety around typically, or someone who has that undefined, like he's sturdy in himself. He has a defined spleen. But he didn't do a lot of the like, okay, let's go. Um, he's just like, you tell me when you're ready. And my spleen's like, no, I need you to initiate because I'm not an initiator with my lack of motors. So that offer existed in the past, and it was like sort of a yes. It wasn't a no, but it wasn't like my body just like went ahead and did the thing and made it happen. Um, but again, like I wouldn't say like, no, it's not correct for me to drive ever. But for me to learn to drive, I feel like that requires invitation and energy that I don't have, that I'm going to need from someone else in order to make that happen. And I don't know how or when that's going to show up.
which makes me just think of my next point, which is now going to take us somewhere else. But, well, two things. Is 25, is the opposite of 25 46, or am I making that up?
You are correct.
No wonder we're talking about the body so much. Um, 46 is the love of the body, and the sun's in 25 right now. But then the other thing I wanted to say, just on in terms of 25, something I would highly recommend everyone go and get on Marianne Winnegar's newsletter if you aren't already. But she sent out an email, and she's talking about how between April and May, we're going to have a month of the 2551 being defined. It's currently
Ooh.
defined. But I think it's going to be when Neptune goes into the 25 and the nodes remain in 51, 57 until I think it's like May 10th. So it's going to be like the beginning of May until the the beginning of April until the beginning of May, where we have this whole channel defined. And so, maybe it's a channel thing maybe it's a transit that will ultimately get you driving, if anything. Do you want to say something, Laura?
Yeah, it's gonna be, but it's Neptune. It's Neptune. I feel like that changes things. It doesn't necessarily make it a easy energy to work with, or one that's very crystal clear, that gives us like the okay, like, yeah, do the thing, like it's Neptune.
Well, no, and I mean, I don't know that that's going to give you the energy to drive, but it's going to be interesting to see what it's like for the collective to have a collectively defined ego and G center with the
Yeah,
2551 for a month. And
true.
so, yeah, I mean, I don't know what channel or what transit or what person or what cycle or whatever could be a correct situation for you and for that, but it is something to just like ponder. And on top of that, I just wanted to say that the reason that I'm so concerned about Neptune is because Neptune just went over my sun for the past like 2 years. It's been in the 36, and I will say that I think I understand Neptune a lot more now than I understood before, because Neptune is eviscerating. Don't get it twisted. I know that it's a planet that's actually within the diagonals and the resonance squares and resonance mapping, it's considered a planet that has more to do with the Maya. But Neptune goes in and it dissolves something. Like it dissolves the energy and the very nature of what it means to be the specific gate that it's in. And so my 36th sun and who it is that I am has been basically dissolved into a pile of goo over the course of the Neptune transit. I mean, it has rocked me in every way, shape, form, and fashion. And I was not anticipating that. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be cool. No, I am not. I mean, look, I'm not self. I was not self when it started, and I'm still deconditioned. I was deconditioning then, but it's like, wow, what a time to decondition when Neptune is literally melting and eviscerating every cell of what it means to be you.
Not only that, but I mean, yeah, that, but not only that, because before Neptune was in 36, it was in 22, and so it was bridging your split and making you think you were a manifester. So
Yeah,
there's that.
yeah,
Because like that was
yeah.
when we
So
started our experiment. Like the 1222 was defined for me too, and it really interfered with my self-awareness because that emotional energy was there, and yet it wasn't because it was Neptune, and it wasn't because it wasn't me, but it significantly played a role in my deconditioning process in the beginning. It was different when it went
yeah,
away.
yeah. Yeah, well, and I mean, I'm just thinking like the vanity of the mind that I've had the entire time, still do, probably to some greater or lesser extent, in thinking that, the different phases of your life are within your control. It's like, this is the transit that you're getting for a long period of time, shouting out those people who have gate 3 while Pluto's in 60.
Yeah.
It's a massive kind of thing that you have no control over and that you identify with, that you think it's you until it's gone and you are left wondering why you're acting like a manifester for the past 2 years. Just kidding. I don't really actually I don't I don't actually think I was conscious enough for that transit to take anything of value from it. Like, I don't think I was enough of myself to take any value from it, but um, it's a good example.
Yeah, which is why we decondition over time so we can
Yeah.
sort out what is us and what is just a transit.
Yeah, and what is another person, etc. What is us and what isn't. Anyway, that is everything that I wanted to touch on. But Laura, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I know we've gone on on and
No,
on.
I got to talk about my sheep. I'm happy. I'm content and
Okay.
satisfied.
Satisfied, we're satisfied, successful, all of the things. Okay, sweet. Well, then, thank you everyone for sticking around. If you have one other thing just to mention is we are in the heat of eclipse season. I mean, there's an eclipse in 3 days. And so just, taking extra care to, well, first of all, doing whatever's correct for you, but just, no rash decision making, because I find eclipses to be a time where your not self can get real fired up and really want to make decisions for you. So I'm just going to be watching. I'm going to be watching myself and make sure that I continue to follow strategy and authority to the best of my mechanical ability, I suppose. Laura, do you want to say anything about the eclipses?
No.
Okay, more to come next week, y'all. And yeah, again, thank you for sticking around. And other than that, Laura,
Give us a review. You can give us 5 stars if you want, or any amount of stars, but hey, like, you can give us a little rating if you feel so called. Either here, or if you're on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or wherever, or on YouTube, you can give us a like if you want. Give us support so we get more visibility. Not that that matters, but so we can listen, so your friends can listen to us too. Follow, like, subscribe, do all the nonsense that people do, and catch you on the flip side.
bye.